Which ones are we talking about, Cliff? Sorry. Which created beings? If it's not Lucifer, it's not Adam and Eve, who are we talking about?
Well, obviously, there are also demons who rebelled against God, the demonic.
So it's their fault. Like, Phil's question is specifically that.
Dude, Cliff ran out of... This is sad. I mean, honestly, at this point, it's kind of sad. Because it's like Cliff ran out of people to blame for why animals are sucking right now. And, look, I'm kind of laughing because I can see he's kind of in a stuck situation. This is the other problem why I don't usually do debates. Is like, you got to be quick on the spot. You got to have you got to be ready because the other side is trying to get you. They're trying to get you good.
Sounds again like a bit of an appeal to agnosticism.
That's baloney. That's not an appeal to agnosticism.
This is good. This debate is about to get intense. We could tell. Definitely Cliff is emotional. Things are about to blow the lid, I imagine. Continuing on Alex O'Connor's video, live debate, Cliffe and Stuart Knechtle versus Alex O'Connor and Philip Halper. What are your thoughts about this so far? Again, with all the troubling times we're going through right now, it's pretty chaotic with the recent assassination. I think we need a little bit of a distraction to get away from hyper-focusing on the crazy stuff going on right now in the world. What better than this debate right now? Does God exist? And four gentlemen are tackling that issue. Let's see what happens.
Combined with tremendous goodness, and to listen to some people, I won't name names, but to listen to some people use the moral argument to object to animals being hurt in this life.
Cliff's
and
getting
to prey
worked
upon
up.
people's emotional appreciation of animal life, and then to try and use a moral argument that therefore there is no God. That is absolutely ludicrous.
It's ludicrous to think animal suffering might point toward naturalism rather than a God.
Because if there is no God, morality is relative. So what's wrong with animals dying?
There you go. Animals die. God does it or is involved somehow in what's going on in the world here, right? He allows this to happen. He created the system and the things work the way they do. So what does he do? Well, if there is no God, there's no morality. So why are you complaining about animal suffering?
And obviously, the Bible never says that animals suffer because of human sin. Never once does the Bible say that. Instead, we read that there was a rebellion against God,
That's even, like, think about that. At least Christians try to do that to explain how animals are ending up suffering. God created a world where animals suffer, in Cliff's mind, without humans being the reason for the fall. So God created a world so animals cannibalize and eat each other and die all the time for hundreds of millions of years. Self-confession.
Angel Lucifer led. There was also a rebellion against God in Adam and Eve. So to come down once again so precisely on these points and act like the Bible says this and the Bible teaches that, I begin to think, good gracious, what Bible have you been reading? What are your means of interpreting a text? And if you're going to be overly wooden, it's just as ridiculous to say, well, when Jesus says, I am the vine, he's claiming to be a plant.
So he's using one analogy where Jesus is using a metaphor to teach something powerful, something that is important. I mean, Dionysus also said he was the true vine. He was the vine. We know from the grape clusters and such, from wine. And there's good reason to think there's something going on there. But to jump from that to, like, Genesis isn't talking about cosmology, that the dome is not solid? Come on, Cliff, try harder, man.
You've got to allow an author and a speaker to use metaphor, simile, allegory. And these arguments are really hyper-skepticism that's straining at a net and missing the whole point. And I think
what is it that we quoted?
So can I just
analogy?
I just listed them.
Okay, I just want to interrupt here because the idea of the firmament as a solid dome is well established. I mean, even St. Augustine, let me quote you from here.
So what?
He said, hang on, let me finish, Cliff. Let me just read the quote.
He's not the Bible. St. Augustine.
No, I know.
Luther's Martin Luther. Well,
Okay.
I'm using arguments.
Sorry,
I'm not
can I...
hot shots.
Sure.
I'm listening to arguments and then responding. Please do the same.
We'll listen the same. We'll give about maybe 2 minutes to Phil. I promise we'll come right back.
Okay, so there's good reasons to think that the ancient people believed that the sky was solid. All right,
Yes.
The quote from Augustine, I'll read it anyway, I know you don't care, but he said, bear in mind, the term the firmament does not compel us to imagine a stationary heaven. We may understand this name is given to indicate not that it is motionless, but that it is solid and it constitutes an impassable boundary between the waters above and the waters below. Now, this is found in Sumerian culture as well. They had a solid dome separating waters. The Bible in other places says it separates the water, so it's doing something. I do accept that there can be poetry in the Bible.
I don't get it. Cliff was just arguing against this. There's no science. There's no chemistry. There's no this. There's no that.
I'm not saying there can't be. But in this particular case, they actually explain what the firmament does, right? The Talmudic rabbis debated how thick it was, right? So this is a very commonly held belief.
You'd think Jews knew a little bit about the Hebrew Bible. Just an eensy-weensy bit.
So I don't think you can just be so dismissive that these people really believed it, right? So similarly, even the word rakia, it's from the root, which is to beat out a bowl, right? You can people have interviewed other people in nomadic cultures, and they think the sky is a solid dome, right? So this is very, very common in all the surrounding cultures, in nomadic people today. It's there in the word itself, the rakia. People translated it as firmament because they thought it was firm. The rabbis thought this. It's there in the text. In Job, he describes it as being hard as a solid piece of metal. So there's very good reasons to believe.
Yeah, Phil's right on the money. I mean, yeah. So what's Cliff going to do about it?
That they believed it. Now we can ask the question: what is more likely, that they have this completely false description in the Bible? One, because they didn't know any better. It's written by humans.
That makes sense.
The invention of humans. Or two, that is coming from the God who knows the complete description of the universe. Now, you said
it's got to be the God one.
When it comes to your other point, that science just describes process. That's just wrong, right? Science also gives us an account of origins of things. It describes the nature of the universe. Cosmology is the science that studies the origins, the content, and the fate of the universe. Now, astronomy also describes what the heavenly bodies are. So the fact that it says there's a firmament is a scientific statement. The fact that it says that there was a global flood is a geological statement.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't think there was a flood, right, then, or if you think it's just a story, there's no real flood, then there's no way to falsify it, and it's just, you could just say, no, it's narrative. Cliff and them, I guarantee you, do not think that the flood didn't happen. I'm pretty sure they fall into the category that the Bible is depicting history here, right? So when you pull out Jesus said he's a door, Jesus said he's a vine, that means he's a plant, that's such deceptive tactics during a debate, in my opinion.
And if you speak to geologists, they'll tell you there was no global.
Don't get me wrong, though. Genesis is extremely mythic, poetic, symbolic in a sense. But when you get back into the brass tacks of the ancient Near Eastern material, you find this common material everywhere else as well.
Flood. So you can't say this Bible doesn't have any science in it. It describes the nature of the universe, the history of humanity, the history of the earth, and it just gets it wrong. So the question is, why does it get it wrong? What's the best explanation for that? The most simplest explanation is that the God of the Bible is fictitious.
Mic drop. Boom.
I think that is scarily intellectually dishonest. There's absolutely no description of the process that God used to create. And just because Galileo contradicted the accepted Roman Catholic understanding that the Earth was the center of the solar system.
What? Hold on. Phil didn't say any of that. What is Cliff doing?
Tells you nothing about what the Bible says. It was a contradiction of how the Catholic Church interpreted the Bible and how Galileo did good science.
So is Cliff taking this approach that like the Quranists do when they say the Quran has scientific evidence in it that we now discovered and it's all written back here in the 7th century?
And Galileo did a tremendous job in science and in interpreting the Bible. Galileo said, the Bible does not tell us how the heavens go. The Bible does tell us how to go to heaven. And
what's that got to do with Phil here?
We're mixing areas of knowledge. Science is not in the Bible. And just because Sumerian and Babylonian cultures believed in a steel dome, and just because a lot of the Jewish rabbis believed in a steel dome, does not mean that the Bible is teaching that there is a steel dome over the earth.
Okay, so he is definitely a Protestant, it seems, dying on the hill that the Bible's not teaching the same cosmology as everybody else around that time.
That is so dishonest, it's scary.
No, what's being dishonest is not realizing how to place this literature in its context.
It's not steal. The point is that it says so. I agree. The fact.
No, it doesn't say that.
It does. It absolutely
Then show me where it
does.
says that. It is not saying that. That is your interpretation, and it's a false interpretation. It's adding where the text is silent, and that's intellectually dishonest. If I read the Quran and I add to the Quran, that's intellectually dishonest. I need to study the Quran and quote the Quran. But if I'm going to add to the Quran and then take a potshot at Islam because of my addition to the Quran, that is so intellectually dishonest, it's scary.
Can I ask a question? Firstly, I think even if Phil is wrong here, I would not hasten to charge him with dishonesty. I think that he believes what he's saying to a T. You would just
claim about him choosing to be dishonest. The thinking is honest.
You were just talking about. You were just talking about.
Dude's getting absolutely worked up, and I think if Cliff would have kept himself calm and not so worked up, man, this debate wouldn't have looked the way that it seems to be looking. Even Alex is trying to help the other debaters. Like, he's even trying to help Cliff and Stuart seems more aware of what's going on, but he's like, probably like, Dad, I can't calm him Dad down. But Cliff is going over the top. Like, if you looked at a text and you interpreted a text one way and I interpreted text another way, if me and Cliff went to the same text and interpreted them different, and he disagreed with my conclusion, but I could show that my conclusion lines up with all these other ancient Near Eastern mythologies and their stories, their origin myths, you name it, with the same kind of cosmology, then guess what, Cliff? I have something working for me that you don't, and it's more likely my interpretation makes better sense. What if I said you're the one that is actually dishonest, which I'm not trying to draw a motive like Alex is pointing out here, but dude, you're not even realizing these are interpretations. Your book is definitely something that can be interpreted. And how do we understand the words that are written in it without contextualizing it? It's insanity.
You were just talking about adding something to the Quran. I have, I guess, two questions that I want to ask you, Cliff. The first is this. Do you agree with the scholarly consensus of biblical scholarship, that is, that both the long ending of the Gospel of Mark and also the story of the adulterous woman in John's Gospel were added later than the earliest manuscripts, were later?
This is a good question. We've been dealing with the long ending of Mark.
Interpolations of the text.
Due to the precise nature of the manuscript evidence from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there is serious question whether the end of Mark chapter 16 was an addition or whether it was part of the original writing. The same is true for John chapter 7, the end of 7, and the first 11 verses of John 8. There is serious question due to the fact that those passages are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts that we have, whether those additions or not. Now, Alex, please answer the question. What is more reasonable than the God of the New Testament? Who or what do you put your faith in that is based on more evidence of reliability?
We're getting to this point of reliability because I don't want to just change the subject here. You didn't answer my
Alex,
question.
you asked a lot of questions. Now, could you please?
Yeah, but you didn't.
Cliff is cooking himself. It's wild.
You didn't answer my question. Do you believe that they were later additions or not?
I don't know, but there's solid evidence that those were possibly additions. I don't know.
Okay. In which case, because we have to follow the thread of the argument here, otherwise it's a useless endeavor. If we have good evidence to suggest that people were adding stories into the gospel manuscripts even after they were first published, do we not have good reason to therefore think that people could also add stories to these manuscripts before they were written? In other words, that there are all kinds of things that end up in the gospel manuscripts that did not actually happen and weren't in the earliest traditions.
Historically, that would make zero sense.
No, but I hear you, Mr. Apologist. Alex has a good point here. If it's happening after, who's to say before the canon solidified or earliest textual evidence we have, which, by the way, is not the earliest. We don't have originals. They were already circulating and floating stories or adding material. And he's using this logic to meet Cliff and Stuart where they're at, where they're willing to go. Someone like me would just look at the genre and suppose, no, they're writing fantastic stories. This is a job of fictional history, if you will, placing it in a historical setting, mythographies from the get-go. But let's continue.
Because of the earliest church and how close the events themselves were reported through oral eyewitness testimony, not oral tradition. It was spread throughout the entire universal church and was being preached not just by pastors who were looking for nickels and noses. It was preached by the common people. And so to say that there were early additions is such a leap of faith. It's scary just because potentially there was later additions. I don't think that follows.
Maybe Jesus existed, Alex. Maybe Jesus was just a cosmic hoax. It's possible.
Jesus existed.
It's possible. The question is not what is ultimately possible. The question is, what does the evidence point to as most reasonable, most reliable in light of the evidence that we do have?
I don't know. What is most reliable? Christians added material. Christians wrote other gospels and acts and other epistles and falsified in the name of these apostles who they were. And it seems that's the modus operandi, is to constantly produce these kind of materials and add these kinds of materials. Well, why do we stop at John 7 or the woman, that is the sinful woman? Why do we stop at the long ending of Mark? Why not go further?
That's right. Do you think that outside of the people that Jesus and the apostles and the prophets of the Old Testament rose from the dead themselves, do you think that Jesus is the only person who's ever risen from the dead?
No, Jesus raised people from the dead.
No, outside of the people that Jesus rose from the dead and the apostles and the Old Testament prophets rose from the dead.
It's totally possible that there is some type of near-death experience or some type.
No, I mean, like physical bodily resurrection.
I am not intelligent enough to follow all of the claims, but the resurrection of Christ, I think, is historically validated in a very intellectually satisfying manner.
So here's a question. In Matthew chapter 27, we're told that there's an earthquake, the second earthquake of Matthew, neither of which we have any other reports of, but there's an earthquake, and the grave...
Alex is cooking, like he is seriously cooking. Well, this is the second earthquake, none of which we have any reports of at this time, very interesting, and you should see Cliffe and them do not like this. This is getting rough.
Graves open, and the holy ones of Jerusalem exit their graves and walk around the city of Jerusalem, appearing to many. Do you think that happened?
Yes, I do think that happened. Now, Alex, it's time for you to answer my question.
Yes, I do think that happened.
What is the alternative to the biblical God, Jesus Christ, that you accept as more reliable? And secondly, what's the evidence that alternative to Christ is really reliable?
Now, I got a real question. I think you might agree with me on this. I'm not 100% sure, but does Cliffe and Stuart see the title underneath their names, atheists? Which means they don't claim a deity. They don't claim you got to follow a particular. They're practically skeptics who don't buy that there is a God. So I imagine Phil and Alex would approach the world in a scientific fashion with observable, testable things, not leaps of faith. You may get to places we don't have answers for some stuff, of course. That's the problem. God of the gaps. So they go, well, if you don't know, you have to place your faith in something. And it's like, I just think that we have so much data that can be explained based on the natural processes, working backwards, where we don't have those answers. Something fills those gaps, probably continuing the tradition of naturalism, of evolutionary thought, et cetera, et cetera. Cliffe and them are living in such a my worldview, and you have to have faith, and it's a God, and if you don't have my God, you got to have another God, even if you're an atheist, kind of stuff. It sounds like.
I'm an agnostic. I don't submit to know what the ultimate answers to human existence are, but I don't think that the evidence for Christianity being the correct one is plausible.
So give me the more plausible one. That was my question, Alex. What's the more plausible one that you have chosen to follow? Because obviously you're dressed a certain way. Obviously you have your hair on your face manicured very nicely.
What the hell's his hair on his face got anything to do with it? Alex said he doesn't know. He's an agnostic, right? Obviously there's much more into that definition, but now Cliffe goes, well, then what is the alternative? Give me the better explanation than Jesus. And it is easier. I must admit, it is easier to poke holes and showing flaws in the Bible, flaws in religious systems, than trying to be, I can persuade you that this worldview is consistent in everything I believe about the universe and stuff. That's a harder task to give an affirmative. But of course, Alex is saying I'm not making an affirmative. I don't have those things necessarily like all perfectly explained, but Christianity just doesn't pass the test. So now what? Well, keep exploring, keep looking.
So obviously you have motives, you have ambitions. Mm-hmm. So you're looking for something or someone. What is it and what's the evidence?
Something or someone.
So what you are living for is reliable.
I'm afraid I kind of just reject the grammar of the question. I don't have a systematized theology because I don't even believe in the existence of God. I'm an agnostic. Like I say, I don't know the answer to these questions. I don't know what my ultimate motivations are. I don't even have access to my own sort of deepest psychology. So I couldn't tell you why it is that I shaved my mustache and regrew a beard. I don't know.
Alex is so freaking funny here.
Oh, but I know that it's not because of a man who I don't even believe claims to be God in the first place, allegedly dying on a cross and leaving some scanty evidence behind
I don't
him.
think that's fair. You are far too articulate. You are far too deep a thinker to convince me that there's not something that's powerfully motivating you. You're living for something, for someone, for some worldview, some philosophies, religion, whatever. Come on, sir. You are not just an accident. You didn't just arrive at where you are now by chance. You know that as well as I do.
I don't know.
You know that as well as I do. The mental games that Christians often play, right? It's kind of funny. Look, man, I love Christians, all right? Don't bash me. Let's be honest. Look, on the screen right now, Michael Jones, right? He's right behind my image. Him and Lawrence Krauss debated. We had our beef, and I'm friends with Michael again. I think he's a great guy, I really do, and I'm not trying to do all that. But what I am trying to do is just point out the facts, what I think is most true. And Cliff playing these games with and I know we're not random. This is not random. This is not scientific. It's God's behind this. Come on, man. You know better.
I mean, that's to beg the question. That's precisely the kind of thing that we're trying to discuss here. I don't know how many times I can tell you I'm an agnostic. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how the universe began. I don't know if there's a God. What I do know is that the textual evidence for things like the resurrection in the New Testament is simply not enough to convince me. For example,
what is enough to convince you that whatever you're living for is true?
I don't know. But for example, the reason I brought up the raising of the dead in Matthew chapter 27 is because, look, this is an argument from silence, but some arguments from silence work. And if you'll allow me to finish this point, you agree that the most extraordinary event in human history was recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. That is that numerous people rose from the dead, walked around the city of Jerusalem, and were seen by many witnesses. That's what we're told. Interestingly, the text is a little unclear because it says that at the time of Jesus' death, the graves opened, and then they appeared to people after the resurrection, implying that there's this 3-day period where they're either laying around in empty graves or hidden somehow. It seems like a bit of a confused text. Now, again, one hypothesis is that this actually happened, and for some reason they were, I guess, like maybe still dead in their graves for 3 days and then they got up or something. And that this is, although, like I say, the most extraordinary event that's ever happened in the history of our species and seen by many people, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew in one passing sentence, but is not mentioned in Mark or Luke or John. It's not mentioned in Josephus. It's not mentioned in Acts. It's not mentioned in any other historical source. People will say this is an argument from silence. Somebody said to me recently, we don't have any written sources of the destruction of Pompeii either. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Sure. But imagine that we had numerous sources writing about the city of Pompeii at the time that it was destroyed by a volcanic eruption that didn't mention the volcano. They were writing about Pompeii at the time it's supposed to have happened, and they don't mention the eruption. That would be incredibly strange and suspect.
Yeah, so this is a good point on the argument from silence. There is scant data about Vesuvius at the time Vesuvius erupted. We have decades later, right? We find this material decades and decades later where they talk about what happened. If people were writing at that time about Pompeii and they don't mention it at the time, it's like talking about New York in 2001, September the 11th, but you don't mention the fall of the Twin Towers on that day or that week in New York, right? And that's a pretty odd absence of evidence. So the silence speaks louder than what you would think.
We think that we couldn't trust our source. So one hypothesis is that this actually happened, and for some inexplicable reason, it is just complete radio silence on all of our historical sources. Or it didn't happen and was an invention of Matthew in order to do something like fulfill the prophecy of the apocalyptic Jesus, that soon there would be a general resurrection of the dead. Why is it that when Jesus dies, the graves open, but it's not until after the resurrection that they start appearing to people? Is it because Jesus is supposed to be the firstborn of the dead? Is he supposed to be the first one that's resurrected? I don't know. But like you, Cliff, I'm asking what is the most plausible historical explanation here? And I just don't think that this event happened in the way that you think it did. And if it did, it's a complete and utter mystery why these other sources do not even get a whisper of it.
Just on the question of
God, there is absolutely no problem with resurrection. If there's no supernatural God, then obviously resurrection doesn't happen. But Alex, I cannot accept the way you weaseled out of my question about what are you living for and what's the evidence that what you are living for is true. Agnosticism is an option when it comes to, do I prefer spaghetti or pasta? Do I prefer beans or broccoli? I'm agnostic, okay? But when it comes to the ethical decisions that you have to make every day, when it comes to, is human life valuable, and if so, why? When it comes to, is there a meaning and purpose to life or is there not? And when it comes to, is there life after death or not? You have to go to funerals, Alex and Phil, so do I. People die. You're going to die, I'm going to die. And you have to ask the question, is there life after death or not? You can't just say, I'm agnostic, I don't know. You've got to figure out, is despair a logical conclusion or is there some reason for hope? You cannot be agnostic when it comes to, is human life valuable? Is there a meaning to life? What's the ethical system I'm going to embrace? And when I sit at a funeral, is there any hope of seeing this person again one day, or is there not? You are forced to deal with those questions and to sit back and say, I'm agnostic about whether I pay my taxes or not. I'm agnostic whether I'm going to support equal housing opportunity or not is a cop-out. You can't live your life that way. It's impossible. That is the impossibility of agnosticism. And that's why, Alex, I don't think you've honestly answered my question.
Dude, Cliff, I don't know, man. You know, he's acting a bit crazy. I don't usually watch his videos, right? But I know he appeared on campuses. You could just scroll once in a while. You catch him on this show, that show. Cliff's like extremely worked up right now. Really worked up.
I do want to give you a chance, Phil, and then maybe at the end of your response, Phil, if you were able to redirect us back to, does the biblical God exist per se?
Right. Exactly. This is the topic for our debate. The topic for our debate is not what is the best way to live your life. It could well be the biblical God doesn't exist, but some other God exists. Who knows? It could be deism is true. Maybe James have got it right. That is not the topic for our debate. The topic for our debate is, does the biblical God exist? And I think we provided very good reasons to say that he does not. And I don't think you've addressed, for example, the cruelty to animals in the Bible, in nature. You haven't really given let's just take a specific example, right? In Deuteronomy, we are told that if a town goes around and says, worship another God, you are to kill all of them, including their animals. Now, what justifies that? That's question number one. Now, I want to make a point. Number two, question for Stu. You asked me for the reference about nature, and I found it. Here it is. Leading scientists still reject God. It's 1998, and the paper says, the question of religious belief amongst US scientists has been debated since early in the century. Our latest survey finds that amongst the top natural scientists, disbelief is greater than ever, almost total. Now, if the evidence that you had, that the medics in Harvard had a 40% belief in
I wonder what Stuart's going to pull out of his hat next.
God, if that was a reason, you actually gave that as one of your reasons in your opening statement to believe in God, wouldn't this be a reason not to, right?
Bro, are you kidding me? You keep misquoting me like throughout this debate. I did not give that in my opening. That was a response. The second response would have been that your idea of atheists coming up with science, check out modern science. Alex himself will tell you who started modern science behind the Galileos, the Keplers.
No. It was the Greeks.
All of your fallacious. Like you kept telling me that I was going by certain arguments. You've been misquoting me literally.
It's arguably Babylonians. Just saying. I mean, you can go back to ancient Babylon and find them doing some forms of science. But Phil is correct. Like, it really became mainstream and pushed by intellectuals in the pre-Socratic era. I mean, it just went viral. Scientific material really went
all day. Now, maybe you were quoting Cliff and just got us mixed up. But now that you're going here as well.
No, Stuart, did you or did you not quote the Harvard medics? Yes or no?
In a response to you.
Okay. Whether it's a response or an opening, doesn't matter.
That's great.
You did quote it, right?
That you went and found your little statistic, that you researched it during a debate. I'll go research it and I'll send it, my article as well, to you on email.
Okay.
Fantastic. It doesn't prove a point.
Okay. No, I agree. Okay.
It's the only reason why I'm a little ticked off.
I don't think it's a misquote.
Oh, it's not just Cliff. I didn't realize Stuart was off his rocker too. These guys are so emotional right now. It's unfortunate.
Quoting me, and you keep talking about points that I did not make.
You did make the point about the Harvard medics.
That was secondary. It was secondary. That was not my opening.
Okay, I accept it wasn't in the opening, but I don't think that's relevant. You made the point. Okay, so let's go back to Deuteronomy then. Okay, well, how is it justified to kill the animals of people that say we shouldn't worship God? Tell me what the justification for that is.
Yeah, sure. Alex said the Bible doesn't talk about animals in heaven. Well, clearly it states that the lion will lay down with the lamb in heaven. So who's to say when ultimately animals are swept up, for example, in a bomb in Iraq? I'm sure some squirrels have been swept up in a bomb. Who's to say that that's not justifiable in any sort of way? When we live in a tremendously broken world, you talked about it yourself earlier, over 90% of the suffering we go through is done by humans. So, no.
This is that same, like, what about the little ones that died in the genocide of, Gaza, Palestine during Joshua's conquest? Well, William Lane Craig would say it was better that God took them out while they're innocent so they go to heaven. So the reason the suffering has to happen here, they're actually going to be innocently taken to the better place after we die. So their answer to theodicy is to put the timing later after death.
I'm not going to give you I don't want to say that I don't have a problem with it. Sure, there's some moral feelings that I have where it's, man, God, why do you allow this to happen?
But you need to come to the conclusion that the most reluctant atheist across the pond where you guys live, named C.S. Lewis, he had the opposite response as you do right now. He talks about animal as well as human suffering, and his moral outrage towards it shows that there is a moral law, that there is justice, ultimately, that's objective, and that would be from God. Then secondly, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, the great Pulitzer Prize winning author over here, Annie Diller. Read it yourself. She came to believe in God and then a Christian as well as this huge atheist because of her moral outrage over what she saw mainly with insects in the swamp behind her house that she studied for over a year. When she saw different forms of insects landing on the backs of frogs and slowly sucking their brains out, she didn't have this response that you and Alex did.
What?
Which is, oh, there could be no God who would allow something like that to happen. No, she had the opposite response. And she said, my moral outrage leads me to believing that there is moral object.
Oh my gosh. So if it's just, oh my gosh, I think this is wrong, therefore I think there's a God, right? I think this is bad. And where did I get that moral compass from? That must have been given by the divine. I can't look at the world intuitively with what I have been given by my mama, and my mama was given by her mama, and her mama was given by her mama, through evolutionary processes, helping us navigate the world, figuring out what's better and what's not. It's just odd to me that someone would look at the world, see something so cruel and disgusting, and then go, well, the reason I even feel this way is it's got to be God. It's hard. I mean, it's so subjective, the experience and how one is going to interpret insects sucking the brains out of frogs, or spiders, the way they kill their prey, or animals that, do all sorts of stuff. I don't know how you would just jump to God from that experience. There's got to be more to the story, in my opinion.
Out there. I have a real issue with it. If there wasn't, I wouldn't have a big issue with it. It's just, this is how nature operates. And
Okay, so if nature operates a certain way, we can't actually have intuitions that make us think things are cruel and bad. That without a God. That's the silly position Cliffe and Stuart seem to be arguing.
I'd be okay with that. So
these animals,
some of the biggest things.
Well, human nature, right? What humans do to other humans, right? Like, we're talking disgusting things that happen. I should be okay with that because I do think the world is ultimately a natural place and where evolution took place, and humans are going to act this way. A lot of people are born with dysfunctions and mental illness, and there's also just some really, really terrible people that behave terribly. I could look at the animal kingdom and see similar traits of similar things in the same kind of species. Some species behave in a way where I'm like, okay, like in that species, some of the parents or the father or whatever are like noble, according to what we would say is morality. And then once in a while, you get these really, really terrible examples. I should just be accepting of that because it's nature. It's nothing's right or wrong. It's like they need to get a little bit of studying from a scientific angle why morality even is, why we would go down the path of thinking things are good or bad and not necessarily needing to ground everything in a metaphysical construct in their mind in order to make sense of it.
Yes, and I follow what they're saying. That makes sense to me. It checks out.
These animals are not swept up like you described with those squirrels. These animals are killed on the command of God. And as you know, we discussed this at some length in our last conversation. In 1 Samuel 15, the best of the livestock are kept alive by Saul. And when he approaches Samuel informs him that God has said he regretted he made Saul king. Why did God regret that he made Saul king? Because he kept alive the animals that he was supposed to kill. This is not like there is some kind of natural order which requires a balanced ecosystem which will involve predation and this kind of thing. This is God saying, go into this town, kill the men, kill the women, kill the children and the infants, and kill the animals. And when Saul does not kill the animals and leaves some of them alive, God regrets that he made Saul king. Phil's question, I think, is to explain how this kind of command can be justified. Not animals getting swept up as a foreseen but unintended consequence of the natural order of war, but no, go and kill them. And if you don't kill them all, you're going to be punished for it.
Yeah.
Why?
God said so.
Because you have an omniscient, omnipotent God who controls the entire universe, who we have to allow to judge when he so chooses. And
the animals?
Revulsions in our 21st century mindset, especially you being very white male and me being very white male, in a very secular, very prominent intellectual area of the world, we're going to have a revulsion to it. Now, I'm going to go to your earlier argument, Alex. Go over.
Do you think it's a white male thing to object to the killing of animals?
They're going to say, who are you, Alex, to say in your white Western culture that there's such a big issue with this? The majority of people in those areas of the world would say, of course a God who's big enough, who created you, is allowed to judge in a nasty, brutish.
I just think that's humans compromising with the way things are in the world. So then they have to explain it. They have different reasons and means by which they explain it. And so when animals die, well, God can do what he wants. And that's probably because powerful people, powerful men in the world have done what they want. And so in a sense, there's a bit of reflection to go, who am I? I'm this little small fry. I'm not a leader and king of the world. I'm not in charge of all this stuff. And also, since he's running into a corner here and he realizes Alex is pinning him, well, God can do what he wants. It's his creation, which bypasses the moral question because God can do that with all of his creation. He can annihilate all of us and he'd still be right.
Ancient Near Eastern culture. What's the big deal? And so this gets back to the malleability of the Bible, how it lifts up some cultures and then at the same time challenges and convicts other cultures rather than this just consensus, universalistic, fluffy type of text.
Stu, let me hang on. I just want to ask you a question. Right? Very simple question, right? If torturing animals is not something to make you think maybe the character in the Bible is not the perfect God that you think exists, right? Because it could be there is a perfect God, but it's not the God of the Bible, right? That's possible. Would you concede that?
Anything's possible if I'm agnostic.
Okay. All right. So, right now, if torturing animals is not going to convince you that this God is not perfectly good, if commanding genocide is not going to convince you that this God isn't perfectly good, what would? Tell me what would convince you, actually, the character in this book isn't perfectly good. What would convince you of that?
If he was perfectly good, that he is
what would convince you that he isn't?
Oh, that he isn't?
Yes.
I would start with the resurrection. I wouldn't go to talking snakes. I wouldn't go to a dome. I would go right to the resurrection, see if Christ really rose from the dead, and then see what he said about the Old Testament and the claims of God.
It's funny. I feel like, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but it sounds like Stuart is already making an apologetic to what Phil's saying rather than just going, okay, here's what would convince me that God is unjust. I'd look at these texts and say, hey, here's a problem. No, he's going to the resurrection, finding out the resurrection's true, then listening to Jesus and what Jesus has to say and trusting that. Like, what a hell of an apologetic here, in my opinion.
So, no, I don't know exactly. I would widen the goalposts like Alex on this one and say, No. I think if God destroyed the entire human race and kept the human race dead and there were no human beings out there, well, then we wouldn't know, obviously, if he was so good or bad. But the issue, yet again, is
if you did that,
again, you are being dishonest because you just said that God tortures animals. No, God stopped the torturing of human beings. Look at Moed, for example, and what was going on with child sacrifice. So he would be considered way better, way more good than what you are stating right here. So there's no torturing of animals.
What happened in the flood? What happened in the flood? What happened in the flood? Did they drown over 40 days and nights? Yes or no?
We don't know exactly.
We don't know.
You don't believe the Bible?
I have no idea what that torturing supposedly looked like, or if it was a swift death.
Hold on. Why are you allowed to say you don't know?
I don't know exactly what that looks like, that type of justice. But to say that somehow people were holding little puppies in their hands and slowly killing them, I think that's a pretty weak argument.
Who said that? Who said that? Nobody said that. And also,
why am I torturing? You use the word torturing.
That doesn't flood. No, hang on. The flood is happening over 40 days and nights. Now, in law, waterboarding, where you simulate drowning, is considered a torture. Now, this is actual drowning, done over 40 days and nights. Let's think about this. The weak would die first. The little kittens would die before the adult cats, right? This would be a slow death. It's over 40 days and nights, Stu. Now, also consider this, right? In Joshua, what does God command of the Hebrew armies? He tells them to hough their horses. Do you know what houghing a horse is?
What? That's a good question. We are horse people, but you may know more about horses than me.
Okay, to hough a horse, I had to look this up when I read it, is to sever the Achilles tendon of a horse so that it can no longer run, can no longer walk. It's going to die a horrible death. And that is what God commands the Hebrew armies to do. And it's obviously why. We know why, because it's for victory in battle. Now, God could have easily taught them how to use tranquilizers.
Look at Stuart and Cliff thinking, what kind of comeback can I get off this? How can I win? How can I make these guys look silly? Christians are watching.
He could have teleported the horses elsewhere. He could have just put them to sleep for a few hours during the battle. But no, he commanded this torture, right? Now, if that doesn't convince you that this God is not perfectly good, what would?
Well, I just continue to rely on my favorite intellects over there where you guys are. And C.S. Lewis would answer, yes, there's a problem emotionally for me when it comes to this issue, but there's a greater problem for the atheist and agnostic in explaining this type of moral outrage they have over this issue.
Is it really? Is it really? Because I think to myself, for those who constantly complain about Darwin's black box, as we saw Frank Turek and stuff, maybe C.S. Lewis just hasn't studied enough about evolutionary biology or how ethics have come up or the various avenues of how to explain ethics in light of our evolution and why humans have made these decisions, because the animal kingdom itself also mirrors many of these good and bad, right and wrong, protective mechanisms that we have that are inherently telling us that's not good, this is bad, this is good. That doesn't mean everyone shares the same thing. You can see it across the world. Not everyone is aligned on thinking ethically on matters of life and death and what's good and what's not. But this is such a, let me just defer to C.S. Lewis again. Oh, this is the true myth. They always do that when I'm comparing parallels to other myths. And C.S. Lewis saw these myths. He just died on the hill. This one had to happen.
So we both have problems. I'm not going to say, oh, this is an easy one. And I'm not going to say let's just turn it into a page turner. No, there's true issues here, but I defer to C.S. Lewis, and I think Alex should as well, when saying that you still have a bigger issue than me in answering this question.
Is it a bigger issue to explain that ethics may arise through our evolutionary process? That you don't need to posit a metaphysical deity in order to, come up with a moral compass? Is that a bigger issue? Did God give the moral compass to the animals too in order for them to know and how to behave in certain ways? And then why is it that people always derail and animals derail from that compass based on what we think is right and wrong? Just saying. So I guess what I'm getting at is I think it's easier to try and go down the path of looking at science, observable, testable things than positing a God on this question.
When it comes down to where is this ultimate moral outrage coming from? It's just your own subjective opinion.
I would like to know.
Why try and convince me of this with your great moral outrage?
I'm not trying to convince you as a point of morality. I'm trying to convince you of the point of the truth of the Christian doctrine. I'm making a criticism similar to what Lincoln said of slavery. If this is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying that it's immoral. I haven't used moralized terms. What I'm saying is that it's unexpected on the command of a loving God. C.S. Lewis, of course, has a chapter in The Problem of Pain where he discusses the suffering of animals. You know how he solves the problem? He says that they don't really experience pain. He says that they're in pain, but they don't realize it.
Stuart, did you hear that? Pay attention, my friend. If C.S. Lewis doesn't think they experience pain, but they do, C.S. Lewis just downplayed so much suffering, more suffering than humanity has ever experienced. What a bullshit cop-out that is.
This to me is literally a nonsensical statement. I think that actually doesn't make sense. If you want to take that line, if you want to say, well, let's defer to C.S. Lewis, look at what he says on the suffering of animals, and ask yourself if you'd be okay torturing a dog, because
Stuart ain't liking this.
Because ultimately, although they look like they're in pain, they're not really experiencing it in the way that a human is. Also, be careful with your quotes. I mean, earlier, Stuart, you quoted Dostoevsky. You actually quoted one of the characters of Dostoevsky as saying that if God had said everything is permitted. Of course, the first place that this phrase "everything is permitted" actually occurs is in Crime and Punishment. But in this place, it's applied to the extraordinary men, in particular Napoleon, who are willing to sort of step over the moral feeling that most people have because they've given themselves a position of authority that absolves them of the general morality to commit all kinds of criminality, even though it kind of runs against people's intuitions. People like Napoleon, these great figures, are able to step over that, as Dostoevsky or Raskolnikov says. And for those people, everything is permitted. That sounds a lot more like the kind of thing that the Israelites were doing than anything that any atheist has done. Also, Dostoevsky wrote in a letter to one of his friends, and I quote, "If anyone could prove to me that Christ is outside the truth, and the truth really did exclude Christ, I should prefer to stay with Christ and not with the truth."
Kind of reminds me again of the life of Pi, and I think this is going in that vein of, even if God isn't real, it's not the true story, which story do you prefer, right? And that's an interesting thing because I wrestle with this myself, being totally honest. I don't think Christianity is true. I don't think any of these religions are telling you what is the truth. Based on the words we're reading, they really are this, or they really did these miracles, you name it. But there is a sense in which we don't have anything figured out. And you wonder what worldview can help us navigate best and unify us and also help us maybe with the best philosophy to encounter suffering in the world. And so I get this tension, total transparency. I get the tension and trying to look to an example of a scapegoat figure in mythology as someone who has experienced pain and suffering, endured it, and there's hope for something more and greater. There's a sense in which I get that and I want that, but there's a sense in which I'm like, hey, dude, the fact is this walks and talks and acts and behaves like a duck. And there's all these other ducks. And so I want to be honest with the material. I want the truth, but I also would love for those things to be true. I'm just not persuaded that's the case. And so it's very difficult.
So I agree with you that there are a great many literary greats who have assented to Christianity, but some of them do so on such ludicrous notions as diminishing the idea that animals can feel pain in the way that other human beings can, and others do so explicitly saying that they would do so even if the facts were all against them. I also want to know.
That sounds like William Lane Craig in a way, even though I don't want to strawman him, but he's like, my experience, the Holy Spirit experience, I can't deny, even if the evidence seemed to point elsewhere, I can't deny this. I have experienced this too. We all do, I think. Maybe some people don't, but most people I know do.
Why it is that when I'm asked about the most fundamental, basic question of reality, whether there's a God and what the ultimate meaning of life is, that when I say I don't know, you say that that's an impossible question, that I'm not allowed to have that option available to me. But when we ask you a very direct, simple, textual question, do you think this actually happened and why? You're allowed to say you don't know on that much more simple question.
Oh, I don't. Much of the Old Testament, we went over this. Much of the Old Testament, you have to leave room for. Is it historical narrative, like William Lane Craig says, picking up in chapter 11 of Genesis? Or is that more metaphorical? Is that more literal? Is there poetry in Psalms, for example? You have Deborah talking about the stars are coming to fight for the Israelites. Obviously, that's a song because the next chapter afterwards, chapter 4 and 5, you have clearly that they actually fought themselves. So there was metaphor. So no, I'm not going to take any passage in the Old Testament, and especially in the New Testament, even out of Matthew, one single passage. I think it's greater evidence for reliability in one sense if many were silent on it. I'm not going to build a whole theological position.
If many were silent on it? How would remaining silent about people coming out of the graves help make it more reliable? Man, it's kind of the question if you look at other mythologies or other fictional texts that say these things, but no historical person narrates or depicts that that's what's happened. This helps strengthen the theological position and makes it more reliable?
Off of one verse or one passage. I'm going to take many together. The Old Testament God left room for 400 years for certain people groups to turn, to change, to show love and humanitarian.
Okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding Stuart. Stuart was trying to say collectively, take Paul's letters, take this, take that. But you're all working within the New Testament in order to come up with this conclusion. Meaning fan fiction.
Right. He welcomed slave girls, prostitutes. He welcomed Canaanites into the kingdom. I mean, look at Rahab, for example, another Gentile prostitute. The type of grace and love, I went over this with you last time we talked about Genesis chapter 12, right out of the gate. He's the one who walks through the dead pieces of animals rather than saying, Abraham, you have to do it, because judgment, it's talking already about in Genesis 11, is going to land on God. That is the best form of sacrifice and love I could ever imagine. The other side is not contradicting himself, but it's showing his holiness.
Can I ask you a question? We've spoken about God inflicting suffering on animals. As it gets a bit complicated because, like you say, the genre of the text is important. There could be room for things like hyperbole, whatever. But the example that I gave in my opening, I said it was a direct question and it hasn't been answered. And that's due to the sake of time, of course. But I want to give you the opportunity now. That deer, leg trapped under a branch on its own. No moral free choice, no moral soul development, no people looking at this with a chance to save them, giving them an ability to achieve some higher order good. Just starvation for, say, I don't know, a week before finally being stumbled upon by a mountain lion who will kill it by sticking its jaws in its throat, and it will die excruciatingly over the course of a few minutes. This kind of thing happens routinely throughout the animal kingdom. I said that if I gave you the opportunity right now, if I said that you were about to become a random wild animal somewhere in the world right now, when I press this button, I think you would kill yourself before I had the opportunity, because you know that you're about to enter a life of untold misery. The question is, why? Why is this allowed? And bear in mind that I don't know is not an answer.
Oh, yes, it is an answer. I don't know is called honesty, Alex. And if I don't know,
there we have it then. I agree with you. I don't know is called honesty. Agnosticism on this question is called honesty. We don't know. You don't know. I don't know.
Unfair, messed up world. That deer is not born into the Garden of Eden. And because we are born into an unfair, messed up world, I've got a bigger concern than the deer. I've got the concern of my niece who died at the age of 7 in a horrible car wreck. I have a bigger concern, Alex. I have the concern of my nephew who was born with spina bifida. I have a bigger concern, Alex, and that's my younger sister who was born with brain damage and had to go through special ed. We are all born, the deer, the human being, all of us are born into a cursed, unmet, unfair world. Not because God created it that way, but because we human beings told God to take a hike, and Lucifer told God to take a hike.
So I'm wondering if he's slipping Lucifer in to allow for a fall in a chaotic world with animal suffering for hundreds of millions of years. because Adam and Eve doesn't fit that timeline whatsoever. And so human suffering can't be the Adam and Eve thing. But to explain that earlier stuff, we need to have Lucifer be the reason that animal life suffers. Bible doesn't say that, Cliff. Why are you adding to the Bible? You're being dishonest, right? I think he's slipping it in, but it's kind of, it's an odd thing. It's an odd thing. So either the world is this way because this is how things are. Nature's pretty gruesome. It's the system of survival that it just is. Or we need to explain and blame ourselves for it, or blame God, or blame angels. We have to come in with some other thing that tries to make sense of the data.
And when God steps back, chaos erupts. Now, the real question is there a solution? And the amazing message of the gospel of Jesus Christ is God loves us so much that he provides the ultimate solution, forgiveness and eternal life in heaven, where there will be no more suffering, no more death. Now, what's your solution to the very real problem of animal suffering, of human suffering? And you guys, if you're going to be honest, you know you have no solution other than despair. Because
despair. Let me just put it this way. If people are getting cancer and you can't pray it away, God's not obviously healing them. You pray anyway, but God's not the one actually curing cancers, let's just say. But scientists in the lab, humans in the lab realize the suffering of humans and are experimenting and trying to find ways through medical means to mitigate cancer, diseases, you name it. Not through the church or through prayer, but through actual attempts in the physical world to test and try to find ways to reverse and help reduce this pain and suffering that we have. That is, at least within this world, a much better solution than supposing you're just going to get it after this world and not doing something about it here. I get the hope for an afterlife. I personally would love there to be one. I'd love there to be an ongoing thing and a blissful whatever. But I'm also just a human telling you, because I'm experiencing life and I'm a conscious agent who thinks that way. Maybe when you're gone, you don't have anything to think about. Just like before you were born, you don't remember that experience.
if poor suckers get born at the wrong time in the wrong place, it's just fate, destiny, and chance. And why don't you try and be honest about how you have to work through the despair and the meaninglessness of life in light of the fact that there is no God?
I get where Cliff's coming from. I do, because I've been there and I didn't think there was any meaning outside of it. But like, I guess once you realize, it's like the scary thing of like, what's the analogy I would give? When I was riding my bicycle with training wheels as a little kid, my mom and dad would hold my back and I thought, okay, I'm going to be safe. One day they're pushing me and then I realize they're not pushing me and I'm actually on my own. It's like, hold on, I can ride the bike without my parents pushing me. I'm pedaling, I'm doing it by myself. And that can apply to several things in my experience through life as you grow that apply to this. So the point is once you've removed Daddy God out of your life, you can actually realize you had such deep intrinsic meaning in your own experience with the things that matter around you, your wife, your children, your parents, the loved ones, your friends, your family, your animals, of course, and of course, giving yourself meaning and purpose all the time. So there's people who are theist and non-theist all the time who take themselves out of this world because they lack the meaning.
Okay, so I think I just wanted to point out something. I think you've misunderstood the problem. The problem is one of internal inconsistency, right? Either you have to bite the bullet and say the suffering of innocence is okay, or you agree it's not okay, and then you have to explain how all this suffering is allowed. Now, to the question that Cliffe pointed out, and he said, well, humans told God to take a hike. Animals have been suffering for hundreds of millions of years before humans existed. The other point that you need to take account of is that evolution, mass catastrophes like the KT event that wiped out the dinosaurs, these are the engines of how we got here. So if you're going to blame it on Lucifer, you're going to blame it on him. That makes him the author of our creation, because had these events not happened, had evolution not worked the way it did, we wouldn't be here. So these are the engines of our creation. This is why so many theists they say we accept evolution. That's how God used. These are the means that God used to get to us. But these are incredibly violent means. So either you say Lucifer is responsible, but that makes he's the author of our creation, or you have to say, well, no, it was Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but that doesn't answer the question of hundreds of millions of years of animal suffering before.
None of this applies to animals.
Of course, in communication. I never said it was Lucifer's fault. I never said it was Adam and Eve's fault. I said there are consequences to created beings flipping God off and telling God to get lost. It's not the devil's fault. It's not Adam and Eve's fault. It is a consequence of created beings choosing to live their life separate from God. So I don't blame devil.
So which created beings are we talking about?
Yeah, is it the ancient deer in the garden? Is it the ancient, name it, centipede? What did it do to God? How did he flip God off? What animal caused animals to end up in the suffering?
Which ones? Sorry, which ones are we talking
what
about?
I said.
Which ones are we talking about, Cliff? Sorry. Which created beings? If it's not Lucifer, it's not Adam and Eve, who are we talking about?
Well, obviously, there are also demons who rebelled against God, the demonic.
So it's their fault. Like, Phil's question is specifically that.
Dude, Cliff ran out of. This is sad. I mean, honestly, at this point, it's kind of sad. Because it's like Cliff ran out of people to blame for why animals are sucking right now. And look, I'm kind of laughing because I can see he's kind of in a stuck situation. This is the other problem why I don't usually do debates is like, you got to be quick on the spot. You got to have you got to be ready because the other side is trying to get you. They're trying to get you good.
The suffering of non-human animals before Homo sapiens arrived on the scene. So say, 450,000 years ago, an animal suffering. Why? Who is it that rebelled that bring this about?
I do not know. What I do know is the consequence of free, autonomous individuals rebelling against God is chaos, unfairness, injustice fills the gap.
So technically, we don't have a story, but you might as well say the ancient deers did something wrong or some animals did something wrong at some point long before Adam and Eve. What?
That comes later because that's when humans come on the scene. But we're talking about whether we would expect to find, before humans even arrive on the scene, let alone afterwards, billions of years of suffering and death and destruction with no human beings, no Adam and Eve, no even like moral agents to do this kind of stuff. Like the only options available are that somehow these animals are responsible for rebelling against God in some way, or there's some kind of pre-human existing demons or Lucifer, in which case you would be blaming it on them, or the answer is you simply don't know, in which case...
Yeah, because at least in the Adam and Eve myth, they can blame it on a genealogy of humanity. So why is humans having to pay the cost using their own mythology? It's because there's original human that did it, and we're biologically tied. Are you saying that the demons birthed animals, or are you saying Satan was the one he's genealogically tied to the animal kingdom? What?
Sounds again like a bit of an appeal to agnosticism.
That's baloney. That's not an appeal to agnosticism.
This is good.
It's instead a simple, humble statement that I really don't know. And for anybody to argue, they've got all the answers to all the difficult questions, is the height of human arrogance. Now,
precisely. Hold on. I'm so sorry.
You have still not faced the impossibility of agnosticism when it comes to meaning and purpose in life, the value of the human life, ethics, and life after death. And you intentionally evade it. And I don't blame you, Alex. I'd do the same thing if I was sitting in your chair. But you still are going to have to put your head on your pillow tonight. And you're going to have to acknowledge I'm a pretty highly motivated guy. I wouldn't have got the education at Oxford that I have. I wouldn't work as hard as I do at being rational and logical. You are living for something. You have confidence in someone, Alex. Now, come on. Just be honest with me and tell me where your confidence, your faith is.
Oh.
But that does not answer. Hang on.
I have a few things to say.
Hang on, Alex. Hang on. That doesn't answer the question, right? We asked you who was responsible. And then you said demons. And the problem that I faced, the problem that I brought up is going to be exactly the same. That makes then demons the authors of our creation, because as I said, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the evolutionary process. Unless you want to deny evolution, I mean, feel free to do that if you wish. But then you're going to have more mountains of scientific evidence against you, right? So as long as you accept the scientific evidence, then these processes are how we got here. So whether you say it's Adam and Eve, whether you say it's the devil, whether you say it's demons, you're going to be faced with exactly the same problem, Cliff.
False. You have not listened carefully to me. What I have said is God created free, autonomous individuals to live in harmony and love with him. When we rebel against him, there are consequences that we never imagined. Adam and Eve never imagined, Lucifer never imagined, I never imagined.
But before that,
I rebel against God.
Before that, animals
there are amazing consequences that happen, and God created a good world, and when created beings rebelled against him, the consequences were horrific.
Can you imagine that all the animal kingdom gets punished, those consequences because of an angel in heaven? Because of a demon? I mean, at least Adam and Eve, you could say, well, supposedly we come from Adam and Eve in their mythology.
Do you know what redundancy is in design? Do you know what that phrase means?
No, I don't.
Okay, so redundancy means you plan for bad things happening. So one of my hobbies is skydiving. And if our main parachute doesn't work, guess what? We have a reserve parachute. I have a backup for my altimeter, an audible altimeter, in case that doesn't work.
Good.
Right?
I'm glad to hear that.
You build in redundancy into a system. My friend is a pilot. They have multiple backups in case things go wrong. Isn't it bad design for God to design a world that is so fragile that if a few creatures rebel, hundreds of millions, no, billions, probably trillions of animals are suffering? Isn't that bad design? Isn't that a lack of redundancy? No engineer would do that.
Also,
in order to love, we have to have a free will. If we have no free will, love is impossible. And when God creates us with a free will to love, he is obviously taking a limited risk. And the limited risk is that we will choose not to love, we will choose to hate and be apathetic. And there are horrible consequences to that. But the cross of Jesus Christ is a clear statement that God has provided the solution. God has provided the solution: forgiveness, reconciliation with him, with each other, and eternal life. And you guys are looking a gift horse in the face when you reject Christ. He's the best solution that there is to this horrible problem of animal suffering, human suffering.
This seems such an imbalanced debate, personally.
Death of all of us. You're right. It's a real painful issue. Christ's death and resurrection is the most amazing solution to this problem. There's no better one.
And I love that you guys are taking animals so seriously. It's almost like you're appealing to this type of outrage again, but your desire to look at animals like they have souls. I mean, what is a soul? What is a self? Human beings have that. The reason why we were created in God's image, and that type of worldview spread throughout the entire world. And now all of a sudden, slaves, kids, women, people of other ethnicities, all of a sudden had worth.
That's why it took 1800 years, 1800 years after Christianity for slavery to be abolished.
That came from the biblical God, no other God, definitely not atheism or anything of the sort. So I love that you guys are talking about animals and valuing them so much.
I need to jump in here. I need to jump in here. Listen,
here in the U.S., just last point, here in the U.S., 37% of people say that they would save the life of their dog before a stranger. Okay, that is pretty scary. And yet it's appealing to now, okay, my animal has this.
I feel it's unfortunate. Alex has tried to jump in a lot during this debate and hasn't had the opportunity to. And when he does try, of course, Cliffe and Stuart are hardcore. They're going. They're not letting him do his thing.
Incredible worth. Where is this worth coming from? If they're just chemicals, if they're just a form of different fur and bones, why do I care so much? You shouldn't care.
Very quickly. Alex wants to jump in really quick. The idea that animals have moral worth goes back to Christianity. I'm sorry, have you not heard of Jainism? They have as a simple, one of the most basic principles: no violence to living beings. Have you heard of Motzi?
Have you heard of Motzi? Either of them, just like Augustine you brought up earlier.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you're not understanding the point. Hold on, I have to speak. Otherwise, I don't want you to be a potted plant, as has been said.
Sorry about that. Okay, one
of course,
my interruption.
I'm sorry.
One moment, as I want to quickly mention, I was muted on Zoom, so Phil was not ignoring me. He just couldn't hear me. But I said just 60 seconds ago, without realizing I'm muted still, is I want to give Alex a chance to respond, and then Skyphil, and then Phil, and then we'll go into Q&A. So we've got about 2 minutes or so. Alex, the floor is all yours.
Look, man, this is getting kind of ludicrous. I mean, Phil just said a second ago, you said that the care about animals comes from Christianity. Phil said, have you heard of Jainism? He said, well, I don't believe in Jainism. Of course you don't believe in Jainism. What Phil is saying is not that Jainism is true. Phil is saying that Jainism already cared about animals outside of and before Christianity. That's what he's saying, undermining your claim that care for animals can only come from Christianity. Of course you don't buy into Jainism, but it undermines the point that the care about animals can only come from Christianity because we have evidence of a world religion that believes in that cares about animals without and outside of Christianity. Second point, you might not know what redundancy is in planning, but it seems like you know what redundancy is in argumentation. Every single time that Phil has brought up the point of non-human animal suffering before the fall of man, I'm going to underline that, I'm going to quote it again, I'm going to put it in bold, before the fall of man. The answer has been, there are consequences to human creatures who rebel against God. Fine.
I love Alex.
Before that occurred, before any human being had even set foot on the planet, there were billions of years of animals suffering. This cannot be explained with reference to some mysterious consequence for some rebellious, mythical human beings who apparently existed in some garden, or perhaps are a mythological representation of the first proper Homo sapiens who ever walked the planet. Billions of years before they even set foot on the planet, there was already suffering. You cannot say that that suffering is a result of a consequence of human sin. That is what has been said every single time we put this question up, but we still have not had an answer to why animals, again, underline, bold, before the original sin of human beings was suffering and dying in their brutal manners. Thirdly, earlier, and this was a while ago, Cliffe said to me that I was being intellectually dishonest. He said that I was acting intellectually dishonestly, or that he sort of didn't believe what I was saying, or something like that. I may be wrong. I may be incorrect. What I'm saying may be entirely stupid, but I cannot have it said that I'm not arguing honestly here. I'm telling you what I believe, and I'm telling you what I don't know. You said, and I will quote you as best I can. I will quote you as best I can. You said that claiming to have the answer to the biggest questions of the universe is the height of intellectual arrogance. You then told me that me saying I don't know the answer to the most fundamental, foundational question of human existence is an impossible option. And that when you didn't know an answer to a question, that was called basic humility. Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. You don't know. I don't know. There are many things that we do not know. It is not me who claims to have the ultimate answer to these questions. It is you.
Dude, Alex is cooking, and there's so much here that Alex is saying that is just really, really spot on. Let's keep going.
And your worldview. I cannot have it said that agnosticism is not a response, or that I'm somehow evading the questions. Tell me that I'm wrong, fine. Tell me that I'm stupid, fine. Tell me that I'm not understanding your question. Maybe I'm answering the wrong question because I've misheard you. But to say that I'm intentionally evading your question because of some kind of fault in my worldview is an attack on my character that I just can't let stand, because I strive and pride myself on my ability to honestly engage with the questions that people are answering and honestly tell them that I don't know when I don't know. But I really, really want to hear an answer to this question of why non-human animals were suffering. One more time, I'll underline it, before any human being performed any kind of rebellious action that could have consequences on the planet.
I said so clearly.
I don't do this. I want to get a chance to respond, Cliffe, but that was my hope, was that rather than going into another question, we go to the Q&A. I can give you a really quick chance to respond, Cliffe, since the question was nonetheless asked. I do want to see, Phil, if you had any last points you wanted to make. I think that you earlier wanted to say something. I'm not sure you got to.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, Motzi was a Chinese philosopher who lived around 400 BC, and he defended a concept of universal love. So this idea that, the moral concern we have for others comes from Christianity, it is just false. It is wrong.
All right, so Stuart and I got to take a course in communication because we have miscommunicated. I'm sorry for that. Alex, my whole point has been there were created beings before Adam and Eve who rebelled against God. In the first couple of verses of Genesis, you realize there was chaos and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Something was wrong before the creation of Adam and Eve. All right? So it's not an issue of it all came apart because of Adam and Eve. I think it all came apart long before Adam and Eve, because created beings like Lucifer, like the demon.
The animals are created after that chaos. The whole point is, from chaos, he brings order, and animals are now being created in that order. This is why it's such a pain in the butt to use the Bible as evidence when it's so contrary to what the facts ended up pointing out.
Rebelled against God. Second point, Alex, I am not making a statement about your character. I am making a statement instead that it is impossible to be agnostic about the question of human value, human meaning, morality, and life after death, because you have to live life. Because you have to live life, you have no choice. But to answer the question, the person I'm talking to, do they have value or not? Do I have value or not? You can't evade that. You have to answer that. Because how you treat that person is based on whether you view them as being valuable or not valuable. You have no choice but to figure out what's the meaning of my life. Because you have to set an agenda, a schedule for today, tomorrow, next week.
But how do you know he has that experience, that he must experience what you're experiencing? Just saying. I mean, I agree. I think we all have these fundamental existential kind of questions. But how do you know everybody has the same exact experience or has to engage the same way? A lot of our philosophy and a lot of the things we learn from Christianity, someone might be raised in a world where they view the world completely different due to their worldview and their culture. So you shouldn't leap to how I'm working and living my life from morning to night should be the same model that Alex's brain is working off of. I'm just thinking out loud.
And those decisions that you make about your schedule show your priorities, show your ambition in life. Thirdly, you have no choice, Alex. This is not a question of me attacking your character. It's a simple statement, Alex. You have to live life. And the way you live your life ethically shows what you believe. I'm sorry. Your actions are based on thought. They're based on a worldview. That's all I'm saying, Alex. And I'm sorry, Alex, it's not an attack on your character. You have to go to funerals. And you have to decide, is there life after death or not? You cannot just say, I'm agnostic, because the dead body is there. The question is, are you going to see that person or not? So that's all I meant, Alex. This is no attack on your character. Alex, I love you. I like you. You're a great guy. I love talking with you. But agnosticism is impossible when it comes to those fundamental four issues I pointed out to you, because you have to live life. That's all I meant.
I like you too, for what it's worth. And the only quarrel I had in terms of a character attack was saying that I was intentionally evading the question. I didn't believe that that's what I was doing. Maybe I was unintentionally evading the question. Maybe I didn't understand what you were asking me. But to say that I was intentionally evading a question runs counter to the very essence of my, for want of a better word, ministry online.
I apologize for that, Alex. The reason I was so put off by you is because we've had a lot of thoughtful conversation. And when you so glibly dismissed my question of you, I'm beginning to wonder, what on earth is he doing here? Because you're a very thoughtful guy. You're a brilliant guy. No question about it in my mind. But when I asked you that hard question and you just glibly answered it in a few sentences and then moved on, I'm thinking, good gracious, what's going on here?
And you said earlier that you didn't know yourself psychologically. And I'm not saying that in a cheeky kind of way, but I think a lot of the psychological leanings connected to the experience, like Cliff keeps talking about, is really important
here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, right? It's they're going to Q&A. It's really interesting. I just think it was an imbalanced debate. There's so much. It was like nothing but tug of war constantly happening and a lot of talking over each other, but interesting, enlightening. What did you think about the debate? What were your favorite points? What did I miss? Where are you coming from? I want to hear your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the new channel. Here I am reacting to content. I plan on covering other material. Join the Patreon, subscribe to the other MythVision podcast channel, and we'll see you next time.